Hello there, my name is James Reynard. I have a course entitled Learn C++ the Modern Way. This video is to explain what that means. So, what does it mean to learn C++ the modern way? C++ was originally called C with classes. This is because it was an enhancement to the C programming language, which was designed for writing the Unix operating system. C was designed for a very small group of people who were brilliant programmers, working on machines that were incredibly limited by today's standards. So there's really no room for adding anything except the most basic features to the compiler. So for example, if you wanted to write a data structure, you wrote it yourself. There's no point bloating the compiler if you could write a perfectly good one yourself. Memory management: if you're writing an operating system, you need to have a lot of close control over how the memory is managed and what it does and how to use it and when to release it. There's no real point having a compiler trying to second guess you. So this is all great for writing operating systems, but for writing general applications it's not really very good. There's a lot of very complicated things to master, and if you get any one of them slightly wrong, if you get your memory management wrong, if you forget to initialize a variable, if you step outside the bounds of an array, you get what's called undefined behavior. And that basically means that your program is going to behave weirdly and or crash. Not always in the place where the problem occurred, unfortunately. The result of all this is that C with classes, traditional C++, makes it very difficult to write safe code. The C++ standard first appeared in 1998. It added templates, exceptions and the standard template library, which are all very useful things. The problem is that programmers weren't really given a big picture overview of how to use all these features and integrate them into a language that allows you to write safe but efficient code. Another problem is that compilers took a long time to fully support the language. Microsoft in particular was years behind, although in fairness I think they had some sort of a legal problem which prevented them from updating their code. The 1990s were the height of object mania. People were crazy about objects. Object-oriented programming was going to save the world. So every program was written as an object-oriented program, and everything in the programs was made into an object, regardless of whether that was the best solution to the problem. So for example, people who were writing numerical computations, they'd write a class and it would have one member function which basically performed the entire computation, which is strange, but that's how people thought at the time. Actually, going back to the data structures, one of the things people did when they started a project, the first thing they did was to write a string class, because every program basically needs a string class. And quite often you'd need a list class as well. So the world was full of all these buggy, poorly implemented classes. I actually remember one project that I worked on that had 3 different string classes, none of which worked properly, and half the time was spent converting between one string class and another. So that's how things were. Modern C++. The new C++ standard arrived in 2011, and there are subsequent developments of that. There's one in 2017 and there's another one due in 2020. But the one from 2011 was really revolutionary. It really changed the way that people viewed the language. One of the most important features was smart pointers. These mean that programmers no longer need to manually manage memory. The smart pointer will handle it all for you. It will assure you that your objects are correctly initialized and that they get removed when they're no longer needed. So you now have objects which have deterministic lifetimes. So now we have a picture in which you can write safe, efficient code in all circumstances. Even when there's error conditions, the objects will still get removed. So there's no possibility of them lingering around and using up memory or being accessed when they're no longer valid. So this makes it easier to write safe code with well-defined behavior. There are also several different programming paradigms. So we have procedural programming, which was C object-oriented programming, which was introduced by C++, then generic programming, which came in with C++ 98 but wasn't really appreciated at the time. This is also known as parametric polymorphism, which sounds pretty complicated, but basically it means you can write code which will work correctly with any type of data. And then finally, the new paradigm which was added in C++ 11 is functional programming, which makes it much easier to write threaded and concurrent programming safely. So now we have all these different paradigms. We can use whichever one is appropriate for the problem. We can even combine them together if that's the best way to solve it. And we now have a much more powerful and user-friendly language. In fact, I would say that C++ is now as user-friendly as any other modern programming language with comparable power and features. Learning C++ the modern way is not just about language features though, it's also to do with the way that the material is taught. Traditionally, C++ courses are heavily based on C courses with C++ added on as an afterthought. So typically you would learn C, you would have all these problems with memory errors, and then you would get taught the core C++ language, then you would get more C++ features which are basically added in the way that the features were added to the language. So from the point of view of someone learning the language, you have to learn a different language which you then have to partially unlearn and forget about. Then you have to learn a load of new features which aren't presented in any logical order. So you often get quite difficult stuff thrown in, and then later on you get shown an easier way to do the same thing. On a modern C++ course, we completely forget about the existence of C. We start teaching C++ from the word go. So in your first lessons, you're going to learn things that you can use years later when you're programming in C++. And also we present features in the most logical order for teaching and learning and using them. So we start off with the easy stuff and then move on to the more difficult stuff later. Okay, well, I hope I've convinced you of the advantages of learning C++ the modern way. I hope you'll subscribe to my course. If you're watching this on YouTube and you look in the description, there is actually a voucher in there which will give you a discount. So I look forward to joining you on the course, and thank you very much for watching, and see you soon.